Thank you to D2iQ for inviting us along. I'm Morgan Atkins. I'm from ECS Digital, one of the partners that work alongside D2iQ. And I'm here today in this session to talk to you about how we as ECS Digital helped a high street bank migrate their legacy Windows workloads into a quote-unquote retirement home. So a bit of background around me. So I'm a continuous delivery consultant focusing on container delivery. So everything from image creation, orchestration and strategic digital transformations with inside organizations that are looking to adopt and grow their containerization work. We as ECS Digital, like I say, are digital transformation, and we work inside a number of Fortune 500 companies, going from fintech right the way through to oil and gas, media, and government as well. So we have a large portfolio of work. Yeah, so we've got a lot of experience to draw upon, and today is really about kind of just sharing our story around containers and some of the work that we've done inside these banks. So myself, I've worked for ECS Digital for about 3.5 years. I do focus around containers, Kubernetes, Rancher, D2iQ, and everything in between. You saw the map of the CNCF periodic table. We have, on myself, I have a number of experience with a lot of those tools, and a lot of my colleagues, for any gaps that I have, they fill in. So what we're going to cover today, it's a very brief 30-minute slot. Basically, I'm going to walk you through how we modernized the High Street Bank and some of their Windows infrastructure, why there was a need to do this, how we moved those legacy workloads, and the work that is continuing as we speak, actually, and moving into the next, the new decade, as it is 2020. And then just share some of the lessons that we learned kind of along the way. And if we have time at the end, we'll have a bit of a Q&A session. So start off, I guess, with the problem of why we need to modernize and move these applications. So I don't know if any of you are aware that the Windows Server 2008 securities support is due to end on the 14th of January. So coming into 2020, there's a hefty bill for any organizations that are still running legacy workloads, or even modern workloads, but on legacy infrastructure. So the main driver for these companies to want to modernize is obviously to avoid that cost, and to be able to take the opportunity to remediate these applications. Some of them are .NET, some of them are web forms, they're old frameworks, so they're using classic ASP. They want to modernize them, and they don't want to have this problem in a year, 2 years' time to have to go and repeat the entire process again. And I suppose the biggest driver is cost, right? The Microsoft support costs are due to double year on year. So Microsoft are obviously trying to make it as difficult for people as possible to stay on with this infrastructure and to continue supporting. And obviously they want to drive as many people as they can to the Azure stack, so they can consume true cloud services and ultimately line their own pockets. So specifically kind of around our customer, they're a high street bank, so a retail bank that has been around for more than 100 years. So they have many applications. So in the division and the business unit that we were looking at, there was almost 1,000 applications that they were looking to modernize. And they needed to move these applications from the current infrastructure, Windows 2003, Windows 2008 and 2012, onto something like Windows Server 2016 or above, as soon as the kind of security aspects have been completed by the bank. We, obviously, as a digital transformation, looked at these applications and we said, okay, we need to assess them and identify which ones are should be migrated first, prioritize them and put them into an order. We're looking at, across these applications and across their estate, we're looking at a huge infrastructure footprint. many thousands of VMs, physical tin that's running in various data centers up and down the country. And there's an overhead for that that isn't actually being realized around physical support of this infrastructure, keeping the lights on, and the huge cost around that. And we said to them, look, containerization can help with that challenge. It won't be the silver bullet, but it certainly will help modernize the infrastructure and help drive down those costs. Okay, so there's obviously some, we alluded to some of the makeup of some of these applications. So a lot of them are IaaS. They're generally 2 or 3 tier applications. Excuse me. They're pretty standard, but for whatever reason, they haven't been modernized in the past, whether it was, lack of funding or they weren't necessarily business critical applications, so they didn't see the need to modernize them. If it's going to cost them a lot of money, then they didn't want to spend that if there was no real gain. So some of the other motivations, obviously not around cost, but around why we chose to propose a retirement zone as opposed to a strategic move to containers. Okay, we'll stop development on all of these legacy applications and we'll rewrite them all in Go. We'll do some fancy stuff with containers and we'll make it all super modern. And we'll bring in a bunch of millennials to go and write them in Go and Python, and it'll all be amazing, and we'll be just like Monzo, right? It can't happen. If you've been around for 100, 150 years, you have a legacy estate for a reason. Some of this infrastructure and some of these applications, they work, and they've worked well for a long time. So, we had to be aligned with the strategic view of, cloud native and cloud first, moving towards a more cloud approach when building net new applications. So this is looking at using managed services inside public cloud, or bringing those public cloud offerings on-prem so that we have the security and compliance, but we can still leverage some of those newer technologies. And then obviously it's around what's possible. So we can't go straight to the cloud with these applications because some of the data in them, with the GDPR coming in last year, there's a lot of personally identifiable information in these apps, and we can't just go gung-ho into the cloud, get a breach and be told via Twitter that the bank is actually it's in a huge breach and it's basically being shut down. So that's not what we want to do. So what we proposed is to say, okay, we'll take this approach. We'll look at how we can kind of sidecar this development. We'll build an area that we know will be end of life within 2 to 3 years, because these applications will eventually be decommissioned and forgotten about and will be modernized, but we're not ready to do them today. So let's give you the opportunity to containerize the applications and run them in parallel to the current deployment, and then start slicing out functionality and features where we see fit and where we can see benefit until we get to a point where we can just turn the applications off. So there's a bit of the background. Our approach around this, obviously, I don't know how many of you have worked inside the enterprise, and certainly with financial institutions. The way that they are set up, it is to do almost as little work as possible, a lot of governance, a lot of red tape, and it's all about who you know and not what you know. Certainly when it comes to vendors and distributors and people who are ultimately supporting applications. So what we said is we will come in with a 3-pronged approach. So firstly, we were going to foster trust, and we do this by becoming a technical advisor across a number of the bank's external third-party suppliers, distributors, and technology providers. And we say, look, we as ECS and ECS Digital have worked with the bank for a long time, and we'd like to have the opportunity to sniff test all of the wonderful things that are coming out from the likes of IBM and Accenture and Wipro, where they're saying that they can modernize the world and it's going to cost you, it's going to cost you nothing. You just renew the contract next year and we'll just sort it. And what we said is like, okay, we'll be there as a as the technical advisory I've already said, and ensure that what they're saying is actually can come to fruition. And then the other two approaches really are around enabling what they've already got. So, we're not the first people in the bank to try and modernize with containers or modernize full stop. But we need to bring everything to a certain standard. And what we said is we were going to enable them with what they've already got. So there are various value streams and various teams that are working almost black ops within inside the bank, where they've adopted these technologies without prior approval, or they haven't quite got them to a point where they can bring them to production. But what we said is, we'll use our experience and our connections to bring them all up to a certain level and move them into production where we can actually see value in these applications. And then the last point then is really around validate, is taking a holistic view across those 1,950 applications that we've already mentioned, and start prioritizing them in a meaningful way. How much is it going to cost per unit, per application, per type to containerize and move to production, so the bank can really see benefit and their return on investment quickly. Moving them into that retirement zone so that they don't have to have any sort of big changeover to a new version, so that external customers won't necessarily see a big change. It'll just be a slow increment of new features that come out. And what that really looks like at kind of 30,000 feet is identify, categorize, containerize, and then move to prod. And we do that really by, like I said, taking that holistic view, looking across all of the applications, look at all of the different containerization providers, Docker being the main contributor to that, and identifying how we assess an application or its makeup, and realize which bucket to put it in. Whether it's a low-hanging fruit that we can spend a couple of days on and see some great value, or it's going to take more like 3 months to containerize and to move to prod. So the identification process is really around looking at all of the application teams. So 1,000 applications is going to have many thousands of developers. It's going to have a lot of many product owners. Some of those that have moved on. The CM, the database that is collating all of the information about these apps is probably 3 or 4 years out of date. So it was very much a process of going to a particular team, asking them about their application. Usually it was, sorry, I've moved on from the bank. I'm actually in a different division. I deal with a different set of applications, but I do know the person you need to speak to. And it was a lot of going around the houses and ticking off what was true and what wasn't. And as part of that whole process, ECS realized that we needed an easier way and a better way of doing this. So we started developing our own internal tool. So it's a ServiceNow integration that allows us to more easily identify applications, collate them, and have some visual reporting out the back of all of that work that we've put into assessing these applications. And we can instantly see which applications we want to go after, which applications maybe we'll leave to once we've established a pipeline and a process around what we're trying to achieve. And this is the ECS Cloud Wave. It's a data form that an application team can fill out. And once we have enough data from numerous sources, that then can be, we can pull out a number of metrics, and we can identify how we can containerize particular components that have the greatest effect across all of the application estate. And a bit of background then, kind of the selection process, putting it into this, into this matrices that says, look, these are the types of applications we want to avoid. These are some of the applications I think would be a good candidate for containerization, and which applications we really don't want to go near. Okay, COTS is a big one. So commercial off-the-shelf applications, although they can be containerized if the vendor hasn't already done so, it is something that during this process we tend to avoid because we can't have access to the source code. We can't just go and call up Oracle, and I know they have their own container. We can't call up Oracle and say, well, we're trying to containerize your application. Don't worry about the support. We'll definitely pay you for that. But can you just help with this particular issue? They're not going to want to play ball. So this matrix has really helped us categorize and move forward with these applications. Excuse me. So moving forward then into the kind of the validate phase, understanding that the metrics that we pulled out of that feasibility matrix, and understanding which applications to move forward, and be able to show the best value to the bank, because ultimately their bottom line is what they're interested in. As much as we want to build platforms that are that can change the world and can serve applications in a fast, meaningful, secure way. If it's not cheap, then these kind of organizations don't necessarily want to play. So another approach and kind of tool around this. So looking at across 1,000 applications and looking at all these different deviations in IIS, different versions of IIS, different frameworks, applications that rely on web forms, or there's components that aren't necessarily supported by containers, but we could do some DevOps magic to get them working. All of that requires the ability to create certainly Docker files and Docker images and orchestration quickly, and doing that obviously is costly if you're going to put it into the hands of a large team of SMEs. So what we decided to do is short circuit that and provide tooling that will help us provide value to not just this bank, but any organization that is looking to take on containerization. And that's in the form of Contain It. It's again another application that we developed internally, and it's an easier way of driving the creation of Docker files. So you can put it into the hands of somebody who doesn't necessarily understand how to create a best practice Docker file, and using templates and instructions that are provided through the application, they can build and iterate upon an application and its Docker file to create a containerized application. And then there's a process that of iteration over that as new versions come out, and application teams are able then to identify issues that we can go back through the process and refine it. But it really does short circuit that need to upskill somebody within the containerization space and get them containerizing applications quickly. Okay, so one thing I didn't mention in our three-pronged approach is the need for the center of excellence. So obviously I've mentioned that ECS and ECS Digital have been inside the bank for a long time, and it's important for when you're in these types of organizations to leave something behind more meaningful than just an application with a README. So we decided that it was important for us to build a center of excellence and impart the wisdom and the knowledge that we've collected throughout our time with the bank. And doing that, driving through such things as Confluence and SharePoint, fortunately, we're able to disseminate information across multiple teams that really benefit not only the work that we're doing today, but future work that will come forward. And hopefully they'll see our name all over it and say, well, actually, we want them back. We want them back in to help us with our next phase of development. Okay, so that's some of the kind of the prelude to what the problem was and what we decided to propose to the bank. What it actually looked like, and how the approach we took is really the what. So working with the bank, obviously, like I said, we weren't the first people there, but we were certainly the first people there that had a coherent view across multiple teams, across multiple vendors, and were able to instill a new way of working, a more collaborative and open way of working. And we did that by, one, delivering technically, but also a lot of the background to hearts and minds, changing the culture, making sure that people weren't just working in their silos or working with their own vendor, because ultimately they're going to get a bonus because they've delivered something for IBM or for Wipro, working for the good of the bank. And it's really, some of that stuff that isn't necessarily tangible or quantifiable, but it's certainly, once you look at the technical implementation of these activities, you can see that it benefited the process. So first of all, with any compliant environment, we had to get approval for the technology that we're using, for the applications and the data within them to move into production. So we identified a number of applications within each of those types we described earlier, and we categorize them as Pathfinder applications. So these would be applications that we can move through the process of the route to live and get them into production and get them certified by compliance and the regulator to say, they're happy to take the risk on running these containers, running these applications in a platform that is completely different to what they're used to. And we did that, there was a lot of manual process. It wasn't using some of the tools that I've described because they didn't exist. It was working with the developers day to day to say, okay, how do we overcome this authentication issue? Now that we've moved into containers, how are we going to structure the network, structure authentication? How are we going to make sure that the people accessing the data are who they say they are? Traditional issues that we overcome in when doing it without containers, but when we are doing it with containers, there's extra thought that needs and caretaking with deploying these applications, making sure that the delivery process for those images and those containers is secure, and once the application is running, it is also secure. That alludes to kind of the need for a route to live. So we can all hopefully create images and Docker containers here, and we could push them up to the hub, and we can say, right, okay, ops team, now go and deploy that. And it's that process really is quite simple, and it's quite easy to understand as a concept. And it's great for if you're learning a new tool or you want to understand how containerization works. But when you're running in a large enterprise and you're deploying production workloads, having that the ability to build, test, deploy quickly is really important, and it's why we've deployed not only a containerization initiative and the platform to run physical containers, we also deployed a build pipeline. We've integrated with GitHub Enterprise, and we've created Jenkins pipelines so that developers don't have to necessarily build or think about how they build their application. Have they specified the right configuration? They can submit their code into GitHub, they can get the correct approval from their team, and everything else is auto-magically built, test, deployed, and validated into various CI and pre-live environments before that they get their rubber stamp to go to prod. Obviously, hanging together all of that infrastructure, tooling, and the organizational changes requires an operating model. And again, it's really something that is really important for an organization of this size, and certainly within the enterprise, is to understand your operating model ahead of time. It's all well and good saying, we're going to be agile, we're going to have a team of great individuals that are going to support this. But actually, when you're dealing with external customers, it is important that you understand, who is going to be at the end of the phone when things hit the fan. Which team is going to be responsible for pushing out patches? Which team is going to be responsible for failing over to a new data center if that ever happens? And it's those conversations that They weren't super technical in terms of containerization and how the individual application works, but it's certainly at a strategic level, it's important to understand that it is a large part of how you deploy containers into production. So I don't know if you can see, you should be able to see that. So obviously I myself am a continuous delivery consultant, so I was, fingers to keyboard, deploying a enterprise container platform across multiple domains inside the bank, integrating with a number of external providers. That's GitHub, it's Google, and the Docker Hub, so that we can pull those images, pushing them through a bakery and making sure that all of the application is ultimately repeatable and scalable. And it's that platform where both the technical deployment is important, so making sure that we're using things like infrastructure as code, and the governance and the architectural sign-off is also really important, making sure that individuals that are using it understand how it works, but also people who are supporting it understand how to fix things when they go wrong. And that really kind of moves us all the way forward through the whole process of identification, categorization, containerization, then moving into prod. Once we have a platform to land them on, we're really, click on the gas, and we can start scaling up, and we can identify more applications. So the 1,000 applications that we started with, that's the tip of the iceberg, certainly for this organization. There are other business units that are operating in a very similar model that have very similar constraints. And now that we have a platform, we can start cranking the handle, identifying more applications, ingesting them through the route to live, using Cloudwave to identify each part of the application and prioritize them, use Containit to create a number of Docker files and images that are built to best practices and can be moved around the bank in a more open source fashion, and then deliver really containers at scale. All right, I know we asked the question in the last session, how many are running Kubernetes at more than 10 nodes? We're running currently a hybrid cluster. So it's a 22-node pre-live and a 14-node production cluster running both Swarm and Kubernetes, so that we can do both Windows and Linux workloads. So once you start working in kind of the enterprise space and working with these scaled applications, deploying to more than 10 nodes is what really gives the best return on investment for your customers, and certainly for our customer in this situation. So some of the things we learned along the way, I am wrapping up, I promise. Obviously, it's difficult with inside a large organization. If you were inside a startup and you had root access to all of the infrastructure, you could probably build this in a couple of months. But due to the size and the age of the technology and the various different governance and compliance boards and the change cabs that we have to go to go and request all of this new modern infrastructure to be built is difficult. But it is something that we overcome, and the bank has realized that it's important to change not only the route to live for their applications, but the process that sits behind it and makes the decisions. So, like I've already alluded to, is developers do move on. IT is a very incestuous industry. You move along with people and friends that you've made, and you move to new organizations, and you don't necessarily remember or care about what you've left behind. Making sure you have left some documentation, but in 10, 15 years' time, when the application is still running, do you really want to get a phone call to say, do you remember the app you were working on? Can you come and help us with this? It'd be great if you can turn around and say, yeah, here's my invoice. But really, for the organization that you leave behind, and certainly the bank, with such a large estate, having you know, a database or some sort of manifest of how these applications were built, and making sure that in the future, when you know they come to be modernized or decommissioned, that the information is correct and isn't just made up or isn't just blank. Many times we find applications. We went to the data store and there was no information. There was a name of a person who had long exited the bank, and that was it. And we had to go and find a different application. Like I say, important to keep that up to date. And it's important to build that route to live. It's important to have checks and balances. I know we haven't gone into kind of the technical, the pipeline behind a container, but it's important to understand that you know you can't just give unfettered access to these to the internet, so that you know any bug or vulnerability can make its way into the application through a container or through other means. So having you know an appropriate pipeline that at every stage checks that you know the change that has been made hasn't introduced any issues is really important. And I think we've created a process for doing that in a meaningful and coherent way. So some concluding thoughts. Containerization is more than just a single container, obviously, but it's important to understand if you are considering the adoption of containers and looking towards orchestration, there's more than just, you know, which orchestrator am I going to use? I'm going to use Kubernetes, great. I'm going to use Docker containers, great. But then how do you do your DR strategy? How do you do logging and monitoring? What's your authentication? How do you validate that the infrastructure that you're running on is secure? You know, there's lots of other things that need to be identified, and often when looking at containerization, that's missed. So there's just a kind of a bit of a recap then, really, about how our approach and the bit of a life cycle of how we've identified, assessed, validated, selected, containerized, obviously built out that center of excellence, and then scaled up so that you know the bank and any customers that do this approach can really see a benefit to adopting containerization. Thank you. I've gone over time a little bit, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. So the approach we took was ensuring that the infrastructure, so the VMs basically that we were running on, were compliant, and there's a separate team that deals with the compliance, making sure that antivirus is there, the correct monitoring is there. Then once we asked to then approve containerization as a process, you know, we can go to the regulator and say it's the same infrastructure as the previous application was running on. We have this extra bit of this extra application being Docker or containerization. Can you please approve this for us? You know, and we went through that process of ensuring that the application of Docker was certified, making sure that that it was air gapped and it was patched correctly, and any vulnerabilities that are identified had a process for remediation within the month. So it's really, instead of looking at the whole thing, you say, what can we borrow from previous certified infrastructure, and what does containerization remove from that that we can improve on next time? Hope that helps. Yes. So it's a bit of a hybrid when it comes to the operating model. So the application shouldn't change when we do containerization. So we try and do as little code changes as possible. So the end application should be supported in the same way. There is a number of, there's a bit of upskilling that is required, obviously, for an application or a support team that is using containers. But it is really a part of the operating model to ensure that there's either a new team created to support the containerization aspect, or that the existing support team is upskilled. And it's really what we try and do is impart that wisdom and make sure that they are prepared to support any application that we move forward in containers. I think that's it then. Thank you very much.